Hey everyone, it's CurlyHairedHero, and today I've got a Batteryman plus Heroes deck profile for you. So, I really enjoyed using a Batteryman deck a couple months ago on Twitch. I was messing around with that a lot. It's a really fun deck. It was really easy to build. It was also really cheap. It got me to Legend for the first time. Still haven't made it to King Games, but I was able to get out of Platinum Hell with that deck. And ever since then, I've been, doing all these deck profiles, and I've had this obsession with combining an archetype with heroes. And then I was thinking, like, well, Batteryman were my favorite deck. How can I combine that with heroes? And I've just finally cracked the code. So let's go ahead and take a look at that today. So to start things off, the skill that we're going to be using is Radiant Light. It's the skill that you get on Bastion. He has he has 6 different skills. All of them correspond to the different field spells, generic field spells for attributes. So Radiant Light, whenever your life points are 2,000 or less, you can activate Luminous Spark, which increases the attack of all your light monsters by 500, which is nice because it gives all your monsters a nice little boost. Now for this deck, the great thing about it is that it's just the Batteryman core with some e-hero nonsense just for a little extra damage and versatility, I guess, in terms of the sort of monsters you can summon. So to start things off, I run 2 copies of Batteryman Industrial Strength. He's basically the cornerstone of the deck. He's amazing. Your main win condition is to bring this guy out, have Luminous Spark out on the field, so he'll have 3,100 attack, so he'll be a pretty beefy giant beat stick, and you can use his ability to destroy one of your opponent's back row and also one of your opponent's back row and one of your opponent's monsters. You can also combo that by destroying your own cards if you need to. For example, I run a copy of Galaxy Cyclone in case I need to destroy my own cards, because Galaxy Cyclone has the ability that you can use it from the graveyard. So if you want, you can run more copies of Galaxy Cyclone, but instead I run actually 2 copies of Cosmic Cyclone along with Galaxy Cyclone, just so that I can reduce my life points and also disrupt my opponent's back row. We're also going to be playing 3 copies of Miracle Fusion. Unfortunately, this deck, I know I just said Batteryman are pretty good and inexpensive, but in order to run this deck, you're going to need a bunch of Miracle Fusions. You kind of need to. Poly is pretty trash. Miracle Fusion is, the best card ever. But you're going to run 3 of those so you can go into your heroes, because you're going to be dipping all of your guys into the graveyard and then drawing into that Miracle Fusion and going into your fusions really easily. We're going to run as well 3 copies of Thunder Seahorse. You can probably replace this with another card, but Thunder Seahorse is a good and bad card. I mean, it's great depending on when you draw it. Like if you draw it first turn, it's pretty good because you can typically not get restricted by the fact that you can't special summon when you use its effect. But it's pretty good as a searcher, and it also throws a Seahorse in the graveyard, which gives you fodder for either your fusions or for your Industrial Strength, which is good. But you can probably do without it, I guess. I don't know, because there are some times where I'll draw into Seahorse and I'm just like, cool. So he's a bit bricky. He's probably the only bricky part in this deck that I can really think of. Other than that, we're going to run 3 copies of Microcell. He is a great searcher for Solar, which you're going to run 3 of, which is another great searcher, and he also dips your monsters into the graveyard, so they both allow you to bring each other out. So Microcell, you can set him, bring out Solar, who lets you dip another Microcell into the graveyard. So once this is destroyed, you got 2 Batteryman in the graveyard, which immediately lets you go into Industrial Strength. And if your Solar gets destroyed, you got 3 monsters, so you can go ahead and activate his effect, assuming you have, Industrial Strength in your hand and whatnot. He's also pretty good in that he summons tokens, which I've had a lot of issues with Solar summoning tokens because I tend to have a full field of monsters sometimes. But to mitigate that, I've started running 2 copies of enemy controller, which has worked out really well because it allows me to use my tokens for tribute fodder, and I can also do some crazy shenanigans now that I'm running heroes. I can also steal my opponent's monsters, and then if I have Miracle Fusion, I can go into an Omni hero with them as well, which is really cool. And then for traps, all I really run is a copy of Floodgate and Wiretap. You can really run anything else. Other than that, that's just what happens to be what I run in this deck, to be honest. But you can really run any other kind of traps. I don't really run a lot of battle traps or anything like that because I have the 2 enemy controllers and then, you know, the microcell solar combo, which usually protects me from battle. So it's usually not. I usually don't need like anything like that, like Wall-E or anything like that. But I think a Drowning Mirror Force would be pretty good in this deck just because it's non-targeting removal, which unfortunately in this deck all you do is target with, you know, Industrial Strength and with enemy controller. So that's why I run a copy of Floodgate. You can also run instead Widespread Ruin because that doesn't target as well. But for the fusions, I'm going to go ahead and run 3 copies of The Shining, obviously, because I'm running a bunch of light monsters. And then I just run some of the common monsters that I think I'll run into. So I put in a copy of Guy and Escurio, just because, as I mentioned, I can steal some of my opponent's monsters with the enemy controller, then I can fuse into it. And most common types are, if I'm not gonna run into a light monster, which I already have 3 of the Shining of, I can run Gaia, and I can also run a Screwido. I might end up actually swapping out 1 Shining for a what's his name, Nova Master, because so far, you know, if you run into Lava Golem, you can use him for that to get rid of Lava Golem, and you can use, you know, Gaia to get rid of Parasite if it gets thrown on your field. So actually I might just do that right now. We'll go ahead and add that to the deck, make a quick little alteration to this deck. Because I've been able to summon 2 Shinings, but I've never been able to summon 3. So I think that'll be fine. And you can also run a copy of Core, just because Core is pretty good. I doubt you'll be able to summon him, considering, but I mean, you can, I guess, technically summon Core. But finally, I forgot 1 card, which is the most important card, which is the only hero you're actually running, but 3 copies of Elemental Hero Voltic. He's the only Elemental Hero that's actually, well, one of the only Elemental Heroes that's not a that's not a Warrior type. It's actually a Thunder type, so he fits into the deck perfectly because you can search him out with your Seahorse. You can fuse him because he's a light monster and also a hero monster, so that's how you go into all of the other heroes here. You can also dip him with, you know, your solar. It works out perfectly. You can even, there are times where I've actually been able to trigger his effect to attack and then summon another Voltic to do an extra 1,000 damage. Works out perfectly. This card was made to be put in a Batteryman hero deck. Alright, so let's go ahead and see what the Batteryman hero deck can do in action right here. So you can see here I started with the Seahorse, which is great to have in your starting hand because it allows you to search out your monsters, and typically first turn you're not going to go into your Industrial Strength or your Miracle Fusion, so it doesn't restrict you, and it filled up your graveyard with the 1 copy of the Thunder type. My opponent here is running a Neos deck, so I managed to use the Cosmic Cyclone, which reduces my life points, which allows me to use Radiant Light pretty soon. I removed the Neos Fusion just so he won't be able to use its effect later on, but it goes into the Brave Fusion, Neos, and destroys my Voltic, which doesn't matter because I can go ahead and fuse the Seahorse and the Voltic. That gets into the graveyard in order to summon the Shining, which has more attack than the Brave Neos here, and without the spell card in the graveyard, you can't use its effect. And Seahorse is also a pretty decent monster because he has pretty decent attack, especially after Radiant. He has 2100 attack, but unfortunately I don't have Radiant out, so I've run into this Clayman. My opponent goes ahead and plays this Blazeman here, gets the fusion, manages to summon the Elemental Hero Core, who is a pretty good card in that his second effect allows him to, at the end of the damage or the battle phase, allows him to destroy a monster in the field. So I lose both my monsters. Shining's effect is pretty cool in that he allows me to return a hero that was removed, so basically whatever you use as a material, which is great. Losing life points is great as well here because it allows me to activate Radiance. So recycling my heroes allows me to get it back. I got really lucky here I summoned the Solar so that I can try and see if maybe I can survive a turn, filling up my graveyard with the Microcell. Thankfully, my opponent decides to play the Pathfinder, and immediately, or sorry, the Connector, and then uses effect twice, not only to summon the first Niels, but to summon the second Niels in defense mode. If he had left the Niels or the Connector in attack mode, he actually would have won the duel. But instead, I'm able to go into my turn, summon Industrial Strength, pop both his core and his back row, summon my Solar, allows me to fill up my graveyard with another Voltic. So if I draw a Miracle Fusion, I can go for a game there. And I managed to get rid of both the Niels thanks to the Luminous Spark that actually lowers his defense, allows Solar to go through, and I actually win the duel because my opponent surrendered. Alright, so in this duel you can see what I was talking about, using, enemy controller, or just having a variety of Omni heroes that you probably won't be able to normally summon in your extra deck. I'm here against a Weevil, who's immediately going to start off setting up all his nonsense, and he's going to try and hit me with the Jade Insect flute thing, whistle, which brings out the Parasite from my deck, or rather puts it on top of my deck, which forces me to summon it as soon as I draw it. So now I have this dumb thing that's turning all my monsters into insects and forcing me to lose 1,000 life points and taking up a spot on my field. But I managed to flip the Microcell to summon Solar to get rid of a Voltic, or dip a Voltic from my deck to the graveyard, and then go into Miracle Fusion with the Parasite in order to summon Gaia, who I usually will never be able to summon because I don't have any other monsters in my deck that are not light monsters. So I was actually able to summon Gaia. Gaia has a great effect that allows you to cut your opponent's monster attack in half and give it to himself, so it allows you to get over big monsters. So if you're running into 2 monsters, you can steal one, fuse it, go into Gaia, and then attack, which would be really good. And if, for example, my opponent here, since they're Weevil and they're filthy, disgusting human, and they decide to go for the Lava Golem on my monsters, which is probably one of the things you would run into a lot, not only against Weevil players, but in this deck, because you're typically going to have a lot of monsters on the field, because like I said, the Microcell into Solar combo lets you usually have monsters on the field, which gives you a nice line of defense and fills up your graveyard, but at the same time, Solar has an effect that whenever you summon a monster, you get a token. So if you have Solar on the field and you summon another monster, you get a token that automatically fills up your entire, field with monsters. So you can run into a lot of trouble with Lava Golem, but in that case, you can use the Miracle Fusion to get rid of the Lava Golem using, Voltic in a graveyard. So it works out pretty well if you have the Nova Master in your extra deck. So you want to run as many Omni heroes as you want. I guess if you want, you can run all the Omni heroes at this point, pretty much just to be safe, and see if you can do some shenanigans. We don't have Super Poly, but we have Enemy Controller, so that's good enough. As previously mentioned with this deck, one of the main issues is, or one of the many issues you can run into this is, for example, Seahorse might brick. If you run into it and you draw it when you have Industrial Strength and you want it to be able to special summon, it might give you some issues there. In addition to that, you might run into some issues with monsters that can't be targeted. So if there are any monsters that have the effect that say that they can't be destroyed by being targeted, or they just can't be targeted in general, it's gonna give you a bad time, considering that the only way you can get through monsters is basically by targeting or by battling. So the good thing about that, at the very least, is that Radiant boosts up your monster's attack, so it gives them pretty respectable attack for pretty much all your monsters except for Microcell, obviously, who only has 100 attack. In addition to that, Shining can boost up his attack if you have enough heroes removed in your remove from play. You can also, like I said, if you get lucky and you manage to steal an Earth monster from your opponent, you can go into Gaia, which gives you an easy way to go over a monster because he's basically just a free Ryoku. Things like that, and in general, running the enemy controller is probably one of the key cornerstones of this deck, because it allows you to get rid of one of your monsters from the field, which are pretty much more or less expandable, and you want them in the graveyard aside from your Industrial Strength and your main hero monsters. But you can use enemy controller to steal monsters, put monsters in defense mode defensively, but also mainly get monsters in the graveyard, which helps fill out your graveyard pretty well. But in general, aside from the targeting issue and maybe bricking with Seahorse and maybe even Industrial Strength, the deck runs pretty well. Can probably mess around with the traps and probably get better results with what I have instead, but the main core with Batteryman and Heroes and Miracle Fusion has worked out perfectly well. Let me know down in the comments below if you think this deck sucks, what you would improve with it, or if you just think it's fucking awesome. Otherwise, stay fresh.